Hey folks, this is Astis back again with another weapons and items video for you guys. If you are new to my channel, I make content on tactics and optimization in Baldur's Gate 3. My hope is that you get more enjoyment out of this game through a better mastery of it. This video is part 4 in a series where I make lists of the top 10 weapons and non-weapon items that you can find in each act. This video is the top 10 weapons you can find in Act 2. One of the things I like about this is that by Act 2, the weapons that you find are really good, and you're getting them early enough that you can actually make a build around them and use that build for a lot of the game, if not most of the game. Because I find it personally very frustrating when I see a YouTube video that's giving me this really cool tactical build that's all centered around items that you get right before the final boss. And it's like, I don't even get to use these. I get to use them for one fight and the game is over. But items that you get in Act 2, weapons that you get in Act 2, you actually do get to use them for most of the game. So that is very cool. Just some disclaimers before we dive into the list. First off, I am listing these in no particular order. So the first weapon I talk about is not necessarily the 10th best weapon in Act 2, and it's not necessarily the best weapon in Act 2. It's just, as a whole, this is the top 10 weapons in Act 2, in my opinion. Also, I have heavily favored weapons that do something interesting mechanically, that is opposed to weapons that just give you flat bonuses maybe to your attack or your damage rolls. There are some weapons you can get in Act 2 that might belong on the top 10 list, but they're just giving you flat damage. Like, for example, I believe there's a Shortsword you can get pretty early that gives you 1d8 psychic damage on hit. And that's really quite good. 1d8 damage adds up, especially in classes that make a lot of attacks. But there's nothing really interesting to say about it. There's nothing interesting really to build around. It's just a weapon that does a lot of damage. So you might use it often in your runs, but it's not making it on my top 10 list because it's not something interesting you can build around. Ultimately, just philosophically speaking, I find that weapons which you might not use every run, but that are really good if you build around them, are better items, and they're also just better for a YouTube video, right? So, alright, enough disclaimers, let's dive into the list now. First up on our list is this weapon right here, the Infernal Rapier. The Infernal Rapier is sadly a weapon that you get pretty late in Act 2. You get it in kind of the last zone if you are doing Will's quest. I don't want to spoil anything, but if you have Will with you in Act 2 and you're doing his quest line, you are going to get to a point where you free a captive, and there will be a chance to make a DC 14 persuasion check. If you succeed on that check, which you should invest everything to succeed on it, you will get an extra item as a reward, and that item is the Infernal Rapier, this weapon right here. So the Infernal Rapier is a +2 rapier that's offering 3 extra things that are all good. First off, it's giving you a +1 bonus to your spell save DC. That's just a flat bonus, but it's a really nice flat bonus on any spellcaster. So already this is a weapon you want to wield with your spellcasters. Then you get the melee caster feature. Instead of dexterity or strength, the affected entity, that is the one using this weapon, adds their spellcasting ability modifier to attack rolls. Okay, so this means, if for example I'm a warlock like Will, Charisma is my spellcasting ability. And that means when I make an attack roll, instead of using dexterity or strength, I'll be adding Charisma to my attack rolls and my damage. Or if I'm a druid, I'll add wisdom. If I'm a wizard, I'll add intelligence. You get the idea. So what this allows you to do is take a caster that also wants to make the occasional weapon attack, invest everything into your spellcasting modifier, and then your spellcasting modifier will be doing double duty both for making attacks and for your spells. And it can take multiple attribute dependent classes and actually allow you to focus on one attribute. It's really good for that. And that's not even all the weapon does. We haven't even got to the summon. Once prolonged rest with this weapon, you can summon a Cambion. And the Cambion is a pretty good summon. You know, it's just an injection into your action economy. That's great. It's an extra target for your unlimited buffs. That is great. And it can cast spells like Fiendish Charm. It's like a charm person. Draining Kiss is an attack that does a lot of damage against charmed targets, so you actually just chain these two together. And then it can cast Rays of Fire, which is like Scorching Ray, which is a pretty good spell. So, yeah, this is giving you an extra summon per long rest just by wielding this weapon. Insanely good. It's really quite a good weapon. So, that is Infernal Rapier. Next up on our list, number 2, is the Drakethroat Glaive. That's this baby right here. I'm probably most excited to talk about this weapon. I love it. I use it in every single run I've done in this game. It's absolutely incredible. So, first off, you can buy this +2 glaive from Roa Moonglow at Moonrise Towers in Act 2. As I said, it's a +2 glaive. If you are a Dragonborn while wielding this, you get this Vicious Dragon Breath ability, where enemies have disadvantage on saving throws against your Dragon Breath weapon. Now, honestly, that is negligible. I've never once combined this with a Dragonborn, to be frank, because even when enemies have disadvantage, the breath weapon isn't that good. I mean, maybe best case scenario, if you have lightning or cold damage on your breath weapon, you're wielding the Drakethroat Glaive, maybe then it could start to be an efficient action. But still, not really something worth building around. The thing that makes this weapon good is Draconic Elemental Weapon. While you're wielding this glaive, once per long rest, you get a special version of the spell Elemental Weapon. Elemental Weapon is normally a 3rd level Paladin exclusive spell. When you cast it, you buff your weapon, giving it a +1 enhancement bonus, that's to attack rolls and to damage, and an extra 1d4 elemental damage of an element of your choice. And I believe with the Paladin, it is a concentration spell. But with Drakethroat Glaive, it is not a concentration spell. It is a concentration-free spell that lasts until your next long rest, which means just as a ritual, every time you finish a long rest, you're going to cast this elemental weapon and get a free +1 to attack rolls and damage, and +1d4 to your damage. And that really, really adds up. Especially on a class like Hunter Ranger late game, or a late game fighter, classes that make a ton of attacks in a round. That's a lot of damage just from one cast of a spell. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, that's cool, but aren't there a lot of weapons that do an extra 1d4 elemental damage? Why does it make Drakethroat Glaive special? Well, what makes it special is that you don't need to cast this on Drakethroat Glaive. Okay, here's the trick that really unlocks this. As you can see, sadly I've already cast it. That's too bad. Well, I'll just show you how it works. If you throw a weapon on the ground, in this case I threw Infernal Rapier on the ground, you equip Drakethroat Glaive, you will have in your tooltip this Draconic Elemental Weapon that you can cast. I'm going to do Tasha's Hideous Laughter to show you. You click on it, and then you target the weapon that you threw on the ground. And it will cast it on that weapon. Then you can pick it up, equip it, and now it's got Elemental Weapon on it until your next long rest. Concentration free, you don't actually need to use the glaive. So basically the glaive actually functions like a wand for casting Elemental Weapon. Actually, I believe I cast it in the save on... Yes, I did. So in this save I cast it on Balduran's Giant Slayer, and you can see here I'm getting that +1. That's the extra +1 from Elemental Weapon. And there's an extra 1d4 cold damage from Elemental Weapon. Yeah, Drakethroat Glaive, it actually functions pretty well as a weapon, because, I mean, technically if you cast it on itself, it's a +3 weapon you can find very early in the game. But if you don't even want to use the glaive, you can just use this to get elemental damage on other weapons. And in particular, this is good when you start combining it with certain items which proc effects when you deal elemental damage. And there's two I want to mention. I know I'm taking a while, but I'll make this quick. The first, in this game I've been using it with Winter's Clutches. Whenever you deal cold damage, you'll inflict 2 turns of Encrusted with Frost. Now when you're dealing cold damage on every attack, and attacking multiple times in a turn, you can stack up a ton of stacks of Encrusted with Frost very quickly. Encrusted with Frost gives disadvantage on dexterity saving throws, and then whenever you get over 7 stacks, enemies will have to make a Constitution saving throw or become frozen, and you start canceling turns. A frozen target also has vulnerability to certain damage types. It's actually pretty good, especially on Eldritch Knight fighters. So that's one way, but probably the better way is with the Gloves of the Belligerent Skies. These are gloves I talked about in my top 10 items of Act 1 video. You should go back and watch it. But if you deal thunder, lightning, or radiant damage on hit, you'll start stacking up reverberation, and each stack of reverberation debuffs enemies' constitution, dexterity, and strength saving throws by 1. And in particular, it's the constitution saving throw you want to debuff. So with Drakethroat Glaive, you can get that lightning damage or that cold damage on any weapon in the game. And of course, both of those elemental types are doubled against wet targets, right? So absolutely insane. Such a great item. Really, really fun. But enough about that. Next up on our list, number 3, it's Punch Drunk Bastard. Man, I probably shouldn't have grouped these up. These are two of the most fun weapons to talk about. Actually, I'm just going to touch on Punch Drunk Bastard. I slept on this weapon for a long time until my very good friend and fellow YouTuber, Bill the Barbarian, really explored this item and discovered how good it was. So I am going to link his video that he made about it in the comments of this one. You should definitely watch it. Bill the Barbarian is one of my favorite new Baldur's Gate 3 YouTubers, and he's all about making builds, so please check that out. But just as a teaser for what he will discuss in more detail, Punch Drunk Bastard, you can get this from the Waning Moon in the back room. When you're wielding this weapon and you are drunk, you're going to get a few effects. The first is you have advantage on all attack rolls. By the way, to get drunk, all you need to do is drink alcohol. And you could do that as a bonus action in fights, if I'm remembering right. So yeah, you just hoard up all the alcohol you find in the game, and you just progressively drink it in a fight for a buff that gives you advantage on all attack rolls. That's already incredible. And then also, your attacks create a blast of 1d4 in a 3-meter radius on the target that you hit. So this is kind of weird, but basically, when you attack a target while drunk, that target and every other enemy within 3 meters of them is going to take 1d4 thunder damage. And where this really starts getting out of control is when you combine AoE attacks with clustered up enemies in this ability. Now, each of the AoE from each target is proccing on all the others, and you can start dealing a ton of thunder damage to every target in that cluster. It really, really adds up. And then it's thunder damage, so you can also combine this with the Gloves of the Belligerent Sky. This is probably the best item for stacking reverberation in the game. So yeah, Punch Drunk Bastard, really good. And then there's another trick for this that unlocks this even further, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. I want you to watch the Build a Barbarian video I've linked in the description to discover that trick, so please do check it out. That is Punch Drunk Bastard, number 3 on my list. Number 4 on our list is a Slicing Shortsword. This is an item I'm really excited about to test more, and actually in this save file, I built a Karlach build all around it. Slicing Shortsword you can buy from Lantarv in the Moonrise Towers. Ignore this 1d4 radiant damage, it's coming from something else. Also this acid damage. Slicing Shortsword is actually a +1 shortsword that gets the Deep Flesh Slice ability. When the wielder attacks with advantage, the attack inflicts bleeding. A target that is bleeding takes 2 slashing damage at the start of each of its turns and has disadvantage on Constitution saving throws. It's removed by healing. Okay, disadvantage on Constitution saving throws is pretty good. There's a lot of effects, really debilitating effects in this game that target the Constitution save. It's probably the second most important save in the game to debuff. Bleeding is a great way to debuff it, and with this short sword, you can impose bleeding just by hitting an attack that you make with advantage. And that is it for this short sword. It might not seem like much, but there's a lot of abilities in this game that function around bleeding that you can really make a build just around the short sword. So there are 3 abilities that are worth mentioning. The first is an ability you can get on your main character. Maybe you can get it on your companions too. I haven't actually tried. Either way, you can only get it on one person. Through an optional, kind of hard to find area in the Underdark in Act 1, you will encounter some fish people that worship a god named Bual. If you choose to support Buwal, you will get Buwal's Blessing. With Buwal's Blessing, this is a permanent ability you will get for the rest of the game. You will have advantage on all attack rolls against bleeding targets. And you can see how that synergizes really well with Slicing Shortsword. If you attack with advantage one time, you will inflict bleeding, and then all subsequent attacks against them will have advantage and will perma-inflict bleeding, so you'll have a constant effect of bleeding with Slicing Shortsword and the Blessing of Buwal. And then you can combine that with certain Wildheart Barbarian features. I have one of them in this run. I'm not sure where it is here. Here it is. Aspect of the Wolverine. So Aspect of the Wolverine, you can get this, I believe, at level 6 on the Wildheart Barbarian. When you attack a bleeding or poison target, you also maim them for 1 turn. A maimed target has its movement speed reduced to 0 and has disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. So now, and by the way, it says when you attack a bleeding target, but actually it's an attack which causes bleeding will simultaneously cause maim as well. So the very first attack you make with advantage will cause both bleeding and maimed while you have this ability and the Slicing Shortsword. So now the targets will have disadvantage both in Constitution and Dexterity throws, so that's cool. And they also have their movement speed reduced to 0, and there's some really cool things you can do with this when you start stacking other crowd control effects like Fog Cloud or Prone. You can really pile them all up and actually just straight up cancel enemies' turns. And it all snowballs out of control just by getting the bleeding effect on a target with Aspect of the Wolverine. So again, my good friend Build a Barbarian actually has a video all around this as well. I don't think he mentions the Slicing Shortsword, but you can watch that video. I will also have it linked in the description to get an idea of what you can do with Aspect of the Beast Wolverine in combination with the Shortsword. And then also, finally, there's a Aspect of Tiger you can also get with the Wildheart Barbarian. You can get both Wolverine and Tiger if you go a full class build. With Aspect of the Tiger, your attacks against bleeding targets will apply double your strength bonus on the attack rolls. Not on the damage rolls for some reason. That might be a bug, but even just applying it double on the attack rolls is really good because you'll be attacking with advantage against a bleeding target with Aspect of Buwal, and also doubling your strength bonus. You hit everything. I mean, they could have armor class 28 and you're probably still hitting reliably with all of those bonuses to hit. So yeah, you can really add all of those things up. I'm doing that build on Karlach right now, but I actually really like it on Asterion for thematic reasons. I don't want to spoil anything, but bleeding builds are really cool with Asterion, I'll just say that. And that is the Slicing Shortsword. Next up on our list, number 5, is Twist of Fortune. I think Twist of Fortune might be the best weapon in the entire game, honestly. And I say might because I haven't tested it that much, because when I just read this item, I realized it's so overpowered that I didn't even want to use it. It felt like it would just trivialize every fight. And from what I've seen on YouTube videos of other people who've used it, I was 100% right on that instinct. So anyways, let's talk about it. And then you can test it out and let me know if I'm right about this being actually ban-worthy. So first off, Twist of Fortune is a Morningstar. And Morningstars are already pretty good items, just vanilla, because of the weapon attacks that they get. So all Morningstars get the Heartstopper ability. Only Morningstars get it. With Heartstopper, when you make an attack and it hits, enemies make a Constitution saving throw, and if they fail, they get the Chest Trauma debuff. With Chest Trauma, they have disadvantage on Constitution saving throws and lose an action per turn. And of course, most enemies only get 1 action per turn. So you're canceling 2 actions because this lasts 2 turns with this. And there isn't a weapon attack, like a vanilla weapon attack, that's as good as Heartstopper. Like, it's so insane. So already that's awesome. They get Concussive Smash, another really, really good weapon attack. Really, really good weapon attack. And then Twist of Fortune gets Blood Money, a unique weapon attack special to it, and this is what really makes this weapon so insane. By the way, I forgot to mention, you can loot this off of Garangoth at the Toll House. You can do it if you prioritize it very early in Act 2. It is not a difficult fight at all. Pretty much as soon as you enter Act 2, you can rush it, and it's easy to beat. So, alright, let's talk about Blood Money. Blood Money is a special attack where you will deal an extra 4 piercing damage per 300 gold that the enemy you're attacking has. Okay, so Against most enemies, this isn't going to be adding that much damage, but if you're willing to metagame and set up with reverse pickpocketing, you can put a bunch of money in enemies' pockets to set up basically a one-shot. Like if you have enough, if you hoarded enough gold, you just one-shot them. And it's piercing damage. And I don't want to give any spoilers for my Act 3 videos, but there's some items in Act 3 which can reliably impose vulnerability to piercing damage specifically. So you can actually double all of this damage. So with enough gold, you just start one-shotting bosses if you can reverse pickpocket. Now the thing is I've never done this. I've never actually reverse pickpocketed any money. I've seen videos of people doing it, so I believe in theory it works. The thing is I don't know how difficult or reliable it is to do that. You guys should play around with it and let me know in the comments. But in theory, on a rogue that's invested in stealth, you should be able to reliably do this to most of the bosses. And now you can just start one-shotting all the bosses in the game as soon as you get this item. And that's just too good. That's way too good. So that's why I kind of don't use it. But you should use it because it's also hilarious and fun. And that's not even all the weapon does. It also gets this Twist of Fortune ability. When you roll a 2 or less with this weapon's damage die, you re-roll it and take the new result. That definitely adds up, especially if you start adding more damage dice to the weapon. I haven't tested this either, but there's other features in the game that do things like this, like the Great Weapon Fighting Style or Savage Attacker. I'm sure it works exactly like them, where if you are doing if you add up a lot of weapon dice either through sneak attacks, through smites, through elemental weapon from the Drakethroat Glaive against a wet target, that re-rolling 1s and 2s really adds up. So even if you ignore blood money, Twist of Fortune's a pretty good weapon. It's definitely worth using. Next up on our list, number 6 is Darkfire Shortbow. You can buy this from Damon in the smithy in Last Light Inn. Honestly, this isn't that good of a weapon. It's just an insane stat stick for melee fighters. It's kind of breaking my rule about not picking just flat stat boost items, but there's enough interesting things to say about this, and it's honestly a really, really good item. It deserves to be on my list. So it's a +2 shortbow. That's pretty good. When you wield it, you get resistance to fire damage and cold damage, 2 very common damage types. So, I mean, yeah, that's incredible. And then you also get 1 cast of haste per long rest. Haste, one of the best spells in the game. So, yeah, tons of great features. And what's really cool is you don't need to actually be using this weapon. It's kind of like Drakethroat Glaive or that cool trick with the Punch Drunk Bastard. You can use it in your offhand slot. So just as an example, I have a melee fighter here that's using this greatsword, and I have Darkfire Shortbow in my range slot because I normally don't make ranged attacks. It's normally just an empty slot, right? But you can see I can still cast haste on myself. And if you look in my inventory, even though I'm not using the bow right now, I still get the resistance to fire and cold damage. So it's a great stat stick in your offhand weapon. And I mean, just getting an extra cast of haste per long rest, already incredible. So that is Darkfire Shortbow. Number 7 on our list is this spear right here. Shar's Spear of Evening. Now, this is a quest item that happens at a very important moment in Act 2, especially if you're following Shadowheart's questline. In the Shadowfell, you'll be presented with a choice, and depending on what you choose, you might get this spear or another. The other we will talk about next. This is a +3 spear that gives you several things. First, Shar's Blessing. You gain advantage on saving throws while lightly or heavily obscured. This weapon deals an additional 1d6 to creatures that are lightly or heavily obscured as well. So, you want to be obscured and you want to be attacking a target that's obscured. And in that situation, you'll be doing 1d6 extra damage to your attacks. So this is actually a 1d6 +3 to your damage for the spear. And you'll also have advantage on all saving throws while lightly or heavily obscured. Okay, so you want to be fighting while obscured, and then the rest of what the spear does basically allows you to do that. So first off, you get blind immunity. Can't be blinded. That means you can cast darkness on yourself. I'll go ahead and demonstrate this just to be sure. So you can see one of my allies is blinded here, Minthara, but I am unaffected. So functions really well with darkness. That spell I actually cast is Shar's Darkness, which is it's a concentration. It's basically the spell Darkness. You create a cloud that blinds people, and it is a heavily obscured area. So while you're fighting in it, you have advantage on your saving throws. You're doing all that extra damage. Awesome. And then finally, you get Edge of Darkness ability. This also creates a cloud of darkness when you attack for 3 turns. So you can either summon a cloud with your action through the Shar's Darkness spell. Oh yes, by the way, you get this once per turn. This is refreshing once per turn. I almost forgot to mention that, and it's probably the best part about it. Or, as an action, you can attack. So I can make an attack, and you see it creates a small cloud which blinds and obscures targets just like the Shar's Darkness. So if you don't want to use an action, once per short rest, you can do it on an attack as well. So, yeah, wow. I mean, what an incredible spear. It's not even just something you can build around. It's really build defining. It's like a build in one weapon that you can get. In my opinion, this is the much better proactive version of the spear to pick, the Spear of Evening. As we'll see next, Spear of Night is also good, but it's a much more passive weapon. It functions much better as a stat stick than the Spear of Evening, which is really like a main weapon they can build a whole build around. Really great for rogue builds, for Shadow Monk builds. I'm definitely going to make a build around it at some point. So that is the Spear of Night. Number 8 on our list is Selune's Spear of Night. That's this right here. You can get this or the Spear of Evening variant, which we've already talked about in this video. In the same way, it has to do with the Shadowfell and Shadowheart's questline. You can get either the Spear of Night or the Spear of Evening. So here is the Spear of Night version. It's a +3 spear. It gives you dark vision up to 12 meters. That's pretty nifty if you don't already have it. But honestly, there's a ton of ways to get this without this weapon. You gain advantage on wisdom saving throws. Okay, that's really good. Wisdom saving throws are the most important to make other than concentration checks. So advantage on them is really good. And you also gain advantage on perception checks, which is really can be useful both in combat and out of combat. So really, really good. And this is a good stat stick ability. Even if you're a ranged attacker and you just have this equipped in your offhand, you're going to get a lot of value out of it. And then it also gives you 2 casts of Moonbeam and Moon Mote, both refresh on a long rest. Moonbeam is just the standard 2nd level spell that druids get access to. It's pretty good for a 2nd level spell. Now, there have been times in my game where when I cast Moonbeam with the Spear of Night, it doesn't take concentration. And there's times where it also does, so you can't really count on it. It's honestly not even worth mentioning, because if you can't rely on it, then what's really the point? But yeah, they probably patched it. That's probably what happened, because I know in early access, Moonbeam had certain patches where it wasn't requiring concentration, so yeah, it's probably been fixed. But either way, a cast of Moonbeam is good. That's great. And it also gives you this Moon Mode ability, which is pretty cool. So Moon Mode is a concentration spell that lasts 10 turns, and it works a lot like the Dancing Lights cantrip. That's kind of what it looks like. It's going to illuminate an area, and each hostile creature in that area must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or treat the area as difficult terrain. So now it's difficult terrain. That's always nifty. And then allies in the area will deal an extra 1d4 radiant damage on hit with melee attacks. This is an unlimited buff. I've talked about unlimited buffs several times, but all allies in the area are getting this 1d4 damage. That means every single summon in the game is going to get this 1d4 damage. If you go back to our best weapons in Act 1 video, I talked about this with Faller Louve. Unlimited buffs in combination with summon comps, or even just a composition that's built around making a lot of attacks in a round, it really, really adds up. Radiant damage is also quite good when you can stack it with certain illuminating gear, which we talked about in our top 10 non-weapon items of Act 2, so you should go back to look at those. Either way, A Selune Spear of Night is just a really, really good, basically stat stick item. You can throw it on your melee slot and all of your ranged builds to get all of these really good spells and really good passive features. Next up on our list, number 9, is Justiciar's Scimitar. You can loot Justiciar's Scimitar off of Lurthindor in the Gauntlet of Shar. This is a +2 scimitar that gets 2 extra features. First off, Shadow Blinding. If you attack with advantage, you have a chance to blind your target. Now, I always hate this "you have a chance" language because I'm never sure what it means, but after doing a little bit of testing with the scimitar, it seems like what's happening is every time you attack with advantage, enemies must make a DC 14 Constitution saving throw, and if they fail, they become blinded. I believe it's for 2 turns. Now, once a target is blinded, you have advantage on attacks against them. So you can kind of snowball this, where you blind them once, and now you have advantage on all attacks against them, and you're more likely to blind them again. But you can also just combine this, the same with the Slicing Shortsword that we talked about, with any of the items or classes in the game which can get advantage on attacks easily. Blind is a very good condition. A blinded target has disadvantage on their attack rolls, and you have advantage on your attack rolls against them. So already that's really good. And then it also gets this Shadow-Soaked Blow ability. Once per short rest, when you strike an enemy, you add your proficiency bonus to the damage. So at the time you get the short sword, it's probably a +3, but by late game it's a +4. That's pretty good. Moreover, if the attack hits, it's going to deal an additional 1d6 psychic damage. So in total, you'll be averaging around a +7 to 8 damage with this attack. And then it does not break concealment. So if you are stealthed, you remain stealthed. If you're invisible, you remain invisible. And I haven't played around with this a lot yet, but I mean, I can just tell you that's quite good. At the least, that's an extra turn avoiding aggro, but I'm sure there's a ton of interesting tricks you can do with this at the start of combat to weaken an opponent. So that's very interesting. Basically, it's a great attack from stealth weapon, because attacking from stealth already gives you advantage. You have this whole thing around attacking with stealth with Shadow-Soaked Blow, and then you can start blinding targets. And blinding targets, especially boss targets, is really good. I can imagine combining this again with an Eldritch Knight, because a late game Eldritch Knight is going to be imposing disadvantage on the saving throw against that blind, and you can just reliably permablind enemies. And that is really, really good. That's definitely something you can build around. So that is Justiciar's Scimitar. Number 10 on our list is Near Misser. Or Never Misser, rather. This is a hand crossbow you can buy from Roa Moonglow in Moonrise Towers. It's very interesting. Again, just like last time we were on the save, ignore the acid and radiant damage that's coming from other things. This is a +1 hand crossbow, which does force damage. Okay. Yeah, not piercing damage, is force damage, which is very interesting. Not a lot of targets resist force damage, so there's already that. I like it especially on rogues for sneak attack. Being able to diversify your damage on sneak attack is really important. But also, there are some ways to impose vulnerability to force damage, and you can then really start benefiting from stacking damage on Near Misser. One way is the frozen condition that we talked about. You can get through Encrusted with Frost. It's difficult to proc. Late game you can do it with some pretty special builds, and when you do it, any force damage gets doubled. So that's very cool. Yeah, so force damage is already really interesting. It's just bypassing a lot of resistances, and there's the opportunity to impose vulnerability to it, which is really cool. And then you also get a cast of Magic Missile, upcast as a level 3 spell once per short rest. And Magic Missile is actually a very, very good spell. On anyone, it's good. I mean, it's just really reliable damage to kill a target, and that's always good. It's especially good if you run this on a Evocation Wizard, because they get to stack up a lot of damage on Magic Missile. So that's really good. Magic Missile is an action to cast, and the cool thing about hand crossbows is you can actually dual wield them, so you could have this in your offhand if you wanted it. So you can cast Magic Missile once per short rest on you as your action, and then offhand attack with your hand crossbow is very good. And just in general, hand crossbows are kind of a broken weapon because there's some bugs in this game that have been around so long, I'm starting to believe they're actually intended. And it's basically, so not only can you dual wield it to make offhand attacks with the double crossbows, the offhand attack applies your dexterity modifier to attack rolls and damage, even if you don't have two-weapon fighting style. So it's kind of like you get a built-in two-weapon fighting style with the dual hand crossbows. So this is the best way to deal damage with rogues if you go the thief build, but there's a ton of builds that benefit from dual hand crossbow. Bards actually do really well. Swords bards, believe it or not, really like dual hand crossbows. So yeah, very cool weapon just in general. The fact that it deals force damage and you're getting a free cast of Magic Missile, definitely something you can build around. And that is it for our list. I have one honorable mention. I'll just jump to a different save for it. We just have one honorable mention. Act 2 is a short act. And there's some very interesting items, as we've seen, but there aren't that many items to really talk about. So this is the last one we're going to cover, and it's the Hellfire hand crossbow. Ignore the +2 acid damage that's coming from a ring. This is a +2 hand crossbow, and the highest enchantment hand crossbow you can find in the game, which is honestly a shame. You can't find any +3 hand crossbows, which, yeah, like, I mean, that sucks because hand crossbows are such a cool weapon, but they're so good just on their own that it's almost like it's like a deserved nerf that you can't find any, like, legendary ones. Anyways, it's +2, and it gets 2 abilities. First, Hellstalker. You can possibly inflict burning when hitting a creature with this weapon while hiding or invisible. So in this run, I have the Hellfire hand crossbow on my Duergar. Duergars get basically an invisibility cantrip, so they find it very easy to proc this, but any class which can hide on a bonus action can also proc this very easily. What happens when you attack from hiding or invisible, they'll have to make a save. So, I don't actually know how often it inflicts burning. If someone knows that, they can please let me know in the comments. The little bit I played around with this, I've noticed that it's not proccing a saving throw all the time, so it's not like Justiciar Scimitar that we talked about, where it procs every time a DC when you meet the conditions. Either way, occasionally when you're attacking from stealth and invisibility, you might inflict burning, which is pretty cool. And then it also gives you a cast of Scorching Ray. Anyways, of course, this is best to combine with the Never Misser. It's a great combo together. And you're getting a cast of Scorching Ray, you're getting a cast of Magic Missile. Both of those spells function very similarly, and they're very good offensive spells. I mean, altogether, though, there isn't much to build around with this. It's kind of lackluster, but I felt like it deserved a mention because it does fit into a hiding and invisibility run, and it is technically one of the best crossbows that you can find, hand crossbows you can find, and just because hand crossbows are so good, you're likely going to make builds around it. So as a final list of all of the items and locations, just in case I forgot to say any, the first item on our list was Infernal Rapier. You can get this at the very last zone of Act 2 during Will's quest. Next one was Drakethroat Glaive. You can buy this from Roa Moonglow and Moonrise Towers. Third was Punch Drunk Bastard. You can get this from the back room of the Waning Moon. Number 4 was Slicing Shortsword. You can buy this from Lantarv in Moonrise Towers. Number 5 was Twist of Fortune, which you loot off of Garangoth at the Toll House. Number 6, Darkfire Bow, you can buy from Dammon at the Last Light Inn. Number 7 was Shar Spear of Evening. And number 8 was Selune Spear of Night. These are competing items. You can only get one of them, depending on the choices you make in the Shadowfell during Shadowheart's quest. Number 9 was Justiciar's Scimitar. You can loot this from Lurthindor in the Gauntlet of Shar. Number 10 was Near Misser. You can buy this from Roa Moonglow. And then I had one honorable mention, the Hellfire hand crossbow, which you can loot from Yurgir in Shar's Gauntlet. That is it for this video, guys. I hope you liked this one. I'll be making more for Act 3 very soon, so if you are interested, please subscribe. I'll catch you next time.